Hello everyone, Ange de Lumière here for High Vibe Monday. Happy New Year everyone. This is the first episode for 2019 and today we're going to talk about how the Akashic Records can help on your slimming journey. Now this is almost like one of those conundrums because for me, and I've talked about this in a previous episode, slimming and spirituality didn't seem to gel together, but I was so wrong, and this is why I'm so excited to share about it today with you. But before we talk about how the Akashic Records can help with your slimming journey, I'd like to start with explaining what the Akashic Records are, because our listeners on the podcast haven't heard about them yet, and it's a concept that's actually not very well known, especially in what I call the Muggle world. Now, Akashic Records readings are quite different from psychic readings, and I want to explain that right away because I have done psychic readings myself for years. I don't do them anymore. And you will understand why very soon when we progress on the Akashic Records and I explain to you why and the difference. So with a traditional psychic reading, you're usually told your future. You come, I would say, probably from a disempowered place. Maybe you're full of fear and a doubt and you feel lost and you're looking to someone wiser than you to tell you what to do. This is probably where most people come to psychic readings. And I'm going to hold up my hand and say I've done this countless of times. And there's nothing wrong with it as such. But with the wisdom that I've gained from doing readings for well over 10 years, sadly, when you approach your future in this way, or your life in general, or any subject that is bothering you, you really put the power in someone else's hands. And this is something that's always made me uncomfortable as a psychic reader in the past. First, I didn't want to have that big responsibility over someone's life and making decisions for other people. But also, I believe on some level that we create our lives as we go, that we are powerful creators. And so if we put our lives in the hands of other people who tell us what to do, really we're relinquishing our own power. And I think that if we are on a path to awaken, and High Vibe Monday is here to help you awaken as well as having the life that you want and the dreams, making your dreams come true, then it's important to make a shift. So a traditional reading would do that. It would be more like yes or no questions. And you would come like, when am I going to be a size 10 again? That would be the typical question that you would ask a psychic reader if you went to see one for your weight issues. In an Akashic Records reading, we don't approach things this way. First of all, you are not told your future because the concept is that you are a creator. So instead of saying, when am I going to be a size 10 again, you would say, how can I manifest the body that I want and be the size 10 that I feel is right for me? And is this right for me? So it's not a yes or no question. It's a it's a how, why, or what kind of question. So you want to look into how can you make it happen rather than is it going to happen? Also, in the Akashic Records, we look into the bigger picture. So I need to explain a little bit what Akashic Records are. When you do a psychic reading, people actually just read the energy around your body. Clairvoyance and clairsentience, clairaudience, whatever their clair is, psychics, are you really energy readers. So when they come to you, they read your energy and they can find out anything they want about you, with your permission, of course. Although I know some readers who don't have any boundaries and who read randomly everyone who comes near them, including when they're not working, and I wouldn't recommend that. But to get back to the difference between a psychic reading and an Akashic Records reading, a psychic reading will look at just your energy, whereas the records are something different. The records is something of a higher vibration that looks at your entire life all the patterns and everything, and the big meaning. It's like I explained that it's like flying over the valley of your life as a bird. So you have an incredible insight on everything that's happened before, everything that's happening now, but now in the context of the bigger picture, the whole valley, and where you're going and how you're going to get there, and all these things. So it's very inspirational, but it can also be incredibly detailed and practical. And some Akashic Records readers stay above, but then don't bring people back onto the ground to show them how to get from point A to point B. And I'm a very practical person. I'm a lawyer by training. I had a 15-year career as a corporate business lawyer. And for me, if it's just theory, I'm not interested. I want to make things happen. And so that's how I read the Akashic Records. You get the bigger picture, but then you also get a plan. Okay? So I'm not going to go extremely in detail into what the Akashic Records are, but what I'm going to tell you is that the guidance that comes from the Akashic Records is always from a place of love. It always will make you feel uplifted, inspired, and good. And believe me, I've been to a lot of psychic readers. That is not the case with psychic readings necessarily. It can be, depending on the energy of the reader, but it's not a given. It's very different. So there's no predictions. It's really information that is going to empower you. And you need to approach it without any expectations. I never know what's going to crop up in an Akashic Record session. I just surrender to the wisdom of something much bigger than I am. Okay? So, and what is incredible as well in the Akashic Records is that you get a taste of enlightenment. You get a taste of what it's like to see things from a bigger picture and sort of drop all your stories, your small stories of your personality, because everyone is an eternal soul. So you go on this big journey, but of course once you're in your body, you're trapped in a very limited perspective on life. As soon as you're born, first your soul has to squeeze into this little body that's quite uncomfortable to start with, which is, I believe, why babies cry a lot. Of course, the other reason is that parents don't always know how to soothe the baby and make them feel better, because the energy of the earth is so coarse compared to the energy of heaven where they come from. So it's a shock to the system. And I know for my part that training in Reiki and showering my kids with Reiki energy has done incredibly good, a lot of good for my children to cope with this environment and feel a bit more ease. So we squeeze into these little bodies, but we also espouse a lot of perspectives that limit our vision. We become gendered. For those of us who accept the gender, I was going to say glasses that we're put on, so we become a male or female. We become a race. We choose to be white or colored or whatever it is. We choose a country. We choose a culture. Within that country and that culture, we choose our parents. They have their own history. We choose our ancestors. We choose our siblings and everything else. And everything is like a funnel narrowing down all your perception of the world to one incredible focus, in a way. This is how I can put it. So reading the Akashic Records enables you to pull yourself away from that little focus that you've chosen for this lifetime for a reason, for certain lessons that you had to learn, or from certain experience. It's not always a lesson, sometimes it's an experience. I know for my part, and I've had this said to me by a psychic actually, that I have experienced every single culture on the planet. So this is why I've said from very young, even when I wasn't aware of all these things, that I was a citizen of the world, because that's how I felt. I couldn't be pinned down to just being French. For me, that was so limiting, and I used to have actually arguments with my mum when she was starting to be a little bit, how do you say that in English? Proud about being French and all this, and and I was kind of like, I don't relate to this, I'm sorry. She thought that she failed her education on me. But so because I had this actually, and it's interesting. I'm just going to throw this here in the conversation because I if people ever felt that way, I want them to feel understood, or at least open your mind about it. But when I started traveling the world as a corporate lawyer, I traveled the entire world. The only place I didn't go to was Australia, and of course I didn't go to every country on the world, but I went to a lot of different continents. And whenever I went there, every time, the moment I put my feet on the ground, I came out the plane and walked the earth, the ground of that country, I felt a sense of familiarity, almost like I connected to another energy of that country that felt familiar. And back then I was a lawyer. I had no training in any of the stuff that I'm talking about, and it felt really weird. Nobody else seemed to feel the same way I did. And now I understand it all, because I had been probably born in that country in another life, and I was just connecting to the energy of that country that felt incredibly familiar. So let's get back to the Akashic records for slimming. So you can imagine that when you go into the Akashic records to understand why you have a weight issue or a body image issue, you will be given information that might be unusual, but that will be incredibly helpful. And I have identified 4 dimensions of this weight issue. For me, it's a 4D approach that's needed. And that's why when I wrote my first book, The Journey of the Slim Soul, I offered this 4D approach, because I had seen people talk about the purely physical approach, which is about how much you eat and how much you exercise. I had learned even about methods about the emotional side of things, where they tackle the emotional eating. And there's a woman, I can't even remember her name now, but I have her books. I bought so many books. I'm a book nerd, as you can see on my shelves behind me. Books of my life. I'm an author as well, so that's what it is. And so she tackled the emotional side of eating and gave permission to people to eat whatever they wanted until they got to the other side of it and sort of broke through this barrier of, I'm going to eat what I want and nobody's going to stop me. And I had also experienced people who did the mental approach to slimming, which is like clinical hypnotherapist. I mean, I'm trained as a clinical hypnotherapist, so I know all about it as well. But nobody actually tackled the spiritual side of things, and definitely no one did the 4D approach that I had in me, that I wanted to promote. So this is why I wrote my book, and I'm not going to go into my book because that's not the purpose of today. But these are the 4 dimensions that I've identified that you need to explore to find out which one is the one that you need to focus on, okay? And when you go into the Akashic records, you'll be shown immediately which level. What's funny is that when I did a bit of channeling today before doing this episode with my guides, and they showed me that these levels are like levels on a game, you know, like you go and play into one of those games, Minecraft, whatever it is. I don't know if they have levels there, but you have level 1, 2, 3, and you try to move from one level to the other. And they said this is exactly the same. So level 1 is the physical. It's the easiest to address. If you only have a physical issue around your weight, meaning if you maybe don't know how to eat well, or you don't know, or you don't exercise much, then the solution will be extremely simple. It will be the solution that most personal trainers will offer you, which is, well, come to my gym, I'll give you an eating plan, you come to the gym 2-3 times a week and we'll solve your problems. And for some people it worked perfectly, because they don't have level 2, 3, or 4 issues that might conflict with the plan at the physical. And if you're one of these people, great. That means your life is relatively simple. You know, if you eat well and if you exercise, then you'll have the body that you want. And if you don't, you know what to do. But for probably, I would say 70 to 80% of people, it doesn't work like that. There's so many layers that come on top of each other that can impact your slimming journey, that it's never as simple as just eating better, well and exercising. There's more to it. So level 2, as they said to me, which I love, this is a game, okay? Let's not take it so seriously. We can just tackle it as a game that you want to win. You know, how many points am I going to get on this? Okay, I'm on level emotional. What's in there? it's a little bit harder than the physical because we're not taught how to explore our emotions. And I was shown this morning when I was reflecting on this topic that food is an extremely emotional topic. And why? It's because it's linked to the mother. It's linked to when we were babies, when we were fed, all the things around food. And in our culture, there's so much around food. We get together to eat. It's a form of love. So I know for my part, there was a huge emotional component to my weight issues because I didn't feel nurtured enough by my mum. She had incredible issues around food and around nurturing. And so food had become my friend, my substitute for mother love, okay? So it was all like, if you take food away from me, what do I have left? I have this big gap in me and I don't know how to fill it. So doing some inner child work, and you might have heard this expression before, and if you haven't, it's a great thing to do. I might put in the show notes a link to some more information about inner child work. In fact, I probably should take a note of this because I'm not very good at remembering to do things like that. So it's important to understand when we're using food in that respect for the emotional side of things, or maybe you're someone who stuffed their emotions down, tried to numb their emotions through putting things in your mouth because it works. If you're feeling upset and you have that piece of marshmallow or cake or chocolate, whatever it is, which I actually did yesterday consciously, so you can also do that consciously, and then it's much better than doing it unconsciously. So are you stuffing down feelings of loneliness, disappointment, stress, feeling unsupported by, reaching out for food? Well, that's another understanding. Because the problem is, emotional eating has become quite a catchphrase, but underneath that, there's a problem that's much more acute. It's that we are not taught emotional intelligence in school or even by most of our parents, and they don't really know themselves how to have that level of emotional intelligence. So we're still struggling to find ways to cope with our emotions. So a good emotional management will help tremendously towards your weight management, because that means that instead of reaching for that piece of cake, you will grab a journal and start journaling. And whilst I'm at it, the first episode of my podcast, the High Vibe Monday, was about journaling. So if you want to go back to that first episode, you will have some techniques to help you with that. So and also that last, before I move on to level 3, we use food as treats a lot, and maybe your parents did that and they didn't know any better, but we are bribed by cakes and sweets and sugar, and a lot of people call that even naughty food. It's like there's all this so charged. The whole subject of food is incredibly charged emotionally. Level 3, you've gone up a level, well done. Level 3 is the mental level. And this level is incredibly powerful. Most people think that it's their consciousness that governs their lives, but it's not true. What governs your life is your subconscious. So if you want to lose weight, let's say release weight, I prefer that word because lose means losing a part of yourself, then that means you want to find it again. So if you want to release weight but your subconscious doesn't want to because it's not safe for you to be slim, or that's actually the belief, then losing weight will be releasing weight, I'm still learning, will be a battle because you won't be aligned with your goal. So there will be an internal battle between one part of your mind and the other one, because they want different things. And it's true with everything in life. It's not just true with slimming, but I'm giving this example because today we're talking about slimming. So you want to be able to dig out the unhelpful beliefs that you have in your subconscious that lead towards thinking that being slim is not safe, or it's not a desired outcome for yourself. Even though you might want it, at the same time you can't have it because there's a part of you that resists it. Now that can be a very tricky terrain to explore, because very often it's linked to possibly sexual abuse, or it can be linked to unwanted physical sexual attention, I had that a lot. I'm going to share a little bit more about my story at the end of this episode. The weight comes as a protection. It can be a protection because at adolescence you don't want all that male attention. If you're a female, obviously. You could have some beliefs that are really, really deeply ingrained that you're not even aware of. That's the thing. Beliefs, we're not aware of them. But you could have been raised or known someone as a child who was very big physically and who was incredibly loving. And so for you, you want to be like that person. You don't realize that you want, but you do because you love them so much. And for you, person represented the most loving person in your environment. So that's what you want to be subconsciously, even if consciously you don't want to be as big as they were. It could be the opposite. You could have met someone extremely nasty who was very slim, and so for you there's an association in your mind between being slim and being nasty, and you don't want to be nasty, so you don't want to be slim. And it's as simple as that. It goes really, really deep. It's the first 7 years of our lives that we build those beliefs. And they might not make any sense at all, but if they're there, they're active. It's literally like having a map and you're trying to get from point A to point B, but these beliefs create roadworks, like blocks. They like literally block the road where you want to go. So you want to be able to remove these beliefs, and the hypnotherapy for it is very good. There's other methods. I'm thinking myself of trying to put together a system where you could identify the beliefs that are stopping you from being slim or the size that you want. And whenever it's ready, I'll let you know. All this is because we have a part of our brain called the amygdala that governs the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is here to make sense of the world. So it's a part of our brain that reorganizes all the things that we go through to make sense of them. So as a child, you have no filters. Everything goes in. Anything that happens to you under 7 or 8 years old will go straight into your subconscious. So as I said earlier, if there was an extremely nasty thin person in your life, and that as a child you associated thin people with nasty people, that's in your subconscious. You have to dig it out and change it and to be able to overcome this belief that is actually today stopping you from being as slim as you want to be. So that's another thing. Now let's get to level 4. Level 4 is the spiritual level or the karmic level. And here we're looking at the bigger picture. We're looking at past lives possibly. We're also looking at the bigger purpose. And this is why I'm going to share a little bit about my own story around my weight, because it's relevant to this discussion. So you could have been, for example, starved in a past life. And I know that's happened to me. It came up. I have had some past lives come up spontaneously, and I've also had some psychics look into my past lives. This is something that might seem really weird, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense, because if in a past life you have been starved, then you will be constantly hungry. And this is what the pattern I had as a child. I was constantly hungry. I could not be satisfied with food. I always had to eat before I was hungry. If I experienced the most minute spell of hunger, I thought I was dying, and I would go into fits, and then it would be, dramatic, overly dramatic. Like those kids who can't go swimming, they scream, they can't have baths or anything. How do we know that it's not because they died drowning in the water in a past life? We have to address these things. And if you're interested, again, I could share some resources in the show notes. I'm going to create show notes for this show in days to come to explore this idea of past lives, past life therapy. It's incredibly powerful. And one of the creators of this past life therapy, who was a Jungian therapist, who initially didn't believe in past lives, but he says you don't actually have to believe in past lives to benefit from past life therapy, because if it works, what's wrong with it? Just do it. And if it changes your life, why not embrace it? Leave aside whatever you believe or not believe, or even your religious belief. If it helps, it helps. Let's just do it. So it could be that you have a bigger purpose about just struggling with a weight issue. I have in mind a couple of women that I know that are extremely beautiful and overweight, and they are here to shine an example on how it is to that you can actually be anything you want to be, and that your weight shouldn't come in the way. Just because the beauty myth at the moment is to have extremely thin women as models doesn't mean that we can't be who we want to be and love ourselves as we are. So maybe it's a non-issue. Maybe your weight issue is a non-issue and you just need to embrace it because you're here to be a role model. And if that's the case, that's fantastic. Because I want to tell you, at this point, I've done a lot of research into this topic. In fact, as you know, I wrote a book in 2009 about it, but I haven't stopped researching this topic since because it's something that fascinates me. Sorry, I dropped my pen. And I came across some research from a psychologist who's a PhD owner, and she does research into all these aspects. And she says that actually there is nothing to back up the statement that being overweight is actually bad for your health. There is no relationship between health and illness. This is something that has been created, fabricated. It's only if you're morbidly obese that you are more likely to have a risk of diabetes, this, that, and the other. Your weight actually has no real correlation with your health. So let's drop this subject altogether. If you want to read more into it, I think it's called Health at Every Size. You can Google it or look into Amazon to find it. It might not be in print, but there will be some. I think there's a new edition that came out. It's important to understand that, because why scare yourself into wanting to be thin when there's no real issue other than maybe your well-being? Now, I'm not saying that if you eat unhealthily, that might not be detrimental for your health, but that's a completely different subject than weight. Yeah, because I know some people who eat very healthily and who are overweight, and they might be overweight because of the aspects that we discussed today, that their bodies want to have that padding to make them feel safe. Maybe there's some other issues around it. This is where we look at the spiritual and karmic aspects of things. And that's incredibly important. Now, the beauty of this is, as I started this episode talking about this, is that when you open your akashic records, you can find out what is this issue really about. And an issue is rarely, what presents is rarely the real issue. There's always something underneath. You want to dig deep to find out what is the cause. And once you find the cause, it's almost like you can unravel the whole thing. Already you have an idea of a plan that you can put in place to get to where you want to be and resolve the issue. And as I just said earlier, there could be no issue. It could be completely fabricated through the scaremongering of the health industry that wants you to believe that being overweight, which is a concept that's been completely fabricated as well. In America, they literally lowered the BMI by 2 points arbitrarily. I think it was about 20 years ago, just because they wanted to promote people eating more healthily. And so overnight, people became obese when they weren't before, because they changed the ratio, they changed the rules, they changed the rule of the game, like overnight. And it's just, I find it crazy. I find it crazy how much spin there is around weight. And I had to talk about this in this episode because it's mind-boggling. It's literally, is it spin doctoring, whatever it is? I'm not too sure. As you know, I'm French, so sometimes I struggle to find my words. But we can still get along and have good episodes. So what you do when you go into the Akashic Records is you have a shortcut. You cut out all the guesswork. You cut out all the hard work. You're trying to control the physical if it was the emotional, or trying to control the mental if it was actually physical. If you have no mental issue around weight, but it's just because you have bad eating habits and you don't move your body enough, then the solution's simple. There's no need to try and find problems around it. Just go and do it. So I'm going to address one more question that might crop up as you listen to my episode today, is can you open your own Akashic Records? And I would say yes, but you would need some sort of guidance because the Akashic Records are an energy that is very, very high. So in order to access this information, you would have to do some work on yourself. But luckily, there are some Akashic readers around, and I am one of them. So if you trust me and would like to reach out and book a session with me, I would be more than happy to to have one with you. You can find me on my website, which is www.icanhelpyouthrive.com, and then you can book yourself directly on my website by clicking the button, and everything then is just automatic. Now, my own story, I'm not going to share too much about it right now because this episode is more about you, but that will give you some really interesting examples. So I mentioned earlier that I was starved in a past life, and it's only recently that I realized how much anxiety, it's more than anxiety, it's almost like a panic attack I had every time I got too hungry because I thought I was dying, which is totally irrational from a mental point of view. But if you look at the spiritual karmic point of view, it makes complete sense. And suddenly, you can just sometimes just learning this information, accessing this information, be enough to soothe you, to soothe your mind, and to resolve the issue just by knowledge, pure knowledge. It's not always enough, but it's the first step. Then you can have some resources to help with other things. I also had a couple of more problems that came on top of this. First of all, there was, sadly, and I'm not giving any names, so you don't know my family, so this is anonymous, but there was a couple of uncles in my family that had wandering hands, let's put it that way. We used to call them the lusty uncles, so it was not safe for me to have an attractive body in my family. I felt I needed to protect myself by being overweight so that I would repel these uncles. And I think this is actually quite a common theme. There was also some underlying jealousy issues with my mother, who was extremely competitive with me and who was obsessed with weight and beauty. And of course, when you have a younger version of yourself, because I look a lot like my mother, who's thinner, younger, and possibly more beautiful than you, how challenging is that? So it wasn't actually safe for me to be slim, young, and beautiful, as well as intelligent, in my mother's world, because that triggered her jealousy. And she did some pretty weird things, like if I had a dress that looked too beautiful on me, the dress would disappear from my wardrobe. And if I asked her what happened to my dress, because of course she was doing the laundry and everything, she'd say, I don't know, like she didn't know the dress even existed. The dress would vanish from my wardrobe. Now that's just crazy mad, but that's what happened in my world. And if it's happened to you, this is a deep subject, about gaslighting, abuse, not feeling safe as a child within your environment. So if you have these kind of issues, reach out to a professional that can support you with them, because by opening this box, it can be a real can of worms. There can be a lot of things to resolve in there, and you need some proper emotional support, okay? And I also shared on my page, my Facebook page, which is called I Can Help You Thrive. I think it must have been yesterday, but I'm not exactly sure. And of course, you'll be listening to this episode maybe at any point in time. I shared about how motherhood had become this heavy weight for me to carry, because from the moment I became a mum for the first time in 1995, my first husband literally completely disappeared. When I say completely, no, he was still married to me and he still came to have his meals at night, but there was nothing left. He was completely absent emotionally. He was completely absent as a father. He would live at nighttime and come back at midnight and leave me to deal with the kids completely on my own. He was emotionally unavailable. And so from the moment I became a mum, I thought I was going to be a mother alongside a father, but I ended up being on my own. And that was a big shock. And I have 4 children, and my journey into motherhood, sadly, was like one disappointment, one betrayal after another. And so I realized yesterday how heavy motherhood had become for me, because it had become a battle with doctors, a battle with teachers, a battle with institutions, schools, everything. And it's a very, very heavy weight to carry. And I think part of my weight issue was due to that feeling of heaviness, of having to carry something that's bigger than me and no support around the issues that I have with my children and how much support I need. So this could be your case as well, in which case, sometimes when people say, oh, I haven't been able to get rid of my baby weight, but how about, did you have some trauma around the birth? it's incredibly more common than people think. Hospitals sometimes are not actually very kind to mothers. They want to control you. They want you to have this baby as fast as possible because they have the next baby coming in. They might force you to have procedures you don't want to have, and at the end of it you're told that you should be happy because you have a healthy baby. If you do, that's the best case scenario. But a whole level of trauma might have happened that you have internalized, and it's still there. And as long as it's there, your way, in a way, is like keeping that trauma in, until you have the courage or the resources or the energy or even the mental ability to deal with it. So weight issues are a lot more complex than they look, and this is what I wanted to explore today in this episode. I want to thank all of you who've watched this episode live. I'm so delighted that you've joined me. If you watch this as a replay, head over for the show notes on my website, which I've mentioned earlier, www.icanhelpyouthrive.com. This probably will be available on YouTube as well. Thank you for your time, and I wish you a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week for another episode. Bye for now.